This 300-ton aircraft, cruising at 35,000 feet, quietly carries 8 sleeping human beings you will never meet above your cabin. Inside a certified compartment mounted above the ceiling. Watch what actually happens up there during a 17-hour flight. Behind the cockpit door, on almost every modern long-haul airliner, there is a hatch that most passengers never notice. It looks like a service panel. Small handle, keyed lock. Behind it, a narrow ladder climbs upward. That ladder does not lead into the cargo hold. It climbs into the void above the cabin ceiling. In that void, above 300 sleeping passengers, there are bunks, 6 on some aircraft, 8 on others. Certified beds with pillows, seatbelts, oxygen masks, and a locked door. A private sleeping chamber for the crew. Right now, thousands of pilots are asleep in that room, 35,000 feet above a dark and empty ocean. The question is not how this room exists.
The real question is why the law demands that it exist. Here's the thing. This compartment is not a luxury, not a perk for tired crews. It is a necessity. It is a structural, legal, physiological necessity, without which a 17-hour flight simply cannot be dispatched safely anywhere. To understand why, we have to start not with the aircraft, but with the limits of the human body. The routes that make this room mandatory did not exist 20 years ago. They are entirely a modern invention. Singapore to New York, Perth to London, Auckland to Doha, Dallas to Sydney, arcs no human once could fly. Flights crossing 15, 16, 17, sometimes 19 hours of continuous cruise over ocean, ice, and empty desert. On the map they look elegant. A single arc over the pole, the equator, an entire ocean below. In the cockpit they look very different. A shift no human being should ever be asked to work alone. A standard commercial cockpit has 2 pilots, captain on the left, first officer on the right, both essential. For a 3-hour hop between 2 European capitals, that crew is more than enough for the mission. But for a 17-hour trans-Pacific crossing, it is physically impossible. No 2 humans can hold that watch alone. Regulators worldwide, the FAA in America, EASA in Europe, CASA in Australia, cap a single pilot's hours. Cross that ceiling and the aircraft is grounded, not delayed, grounded. The reason is not bureaucracy at all. The real reason is that fatigue behaves inside the human brain almost identically to alcohol, not metaphorically, biologically. Studies from NASA, Australia's Transport Safety Bureau, the UK Civil Aviation Authority all converge on one brutal finding. After 17 hours awake, reaction time, decision-making, and short-term memory all degrade to a measurable, dangerous level.
The impairment matches a blood alcohol concentration around 0.05%. Measurable, real, undeniably dangerous. After 24 hours awake, that impairment approaches 0.1, legally drunk in most countries on Earth. No airline in the world would ever allow a drunk pilot into the cockpit. Not one, never once. And yet, without a bed, that is exactly what a 17-hour flight would produce by hour 15. One shift alone would ground the flight before it ever left the gate. That is the paradox. So the industry had to solve it. The aircraft can fly for 19 hours without pause or refueling. The engines can burn fuel for 19 hours. The airframe is certified for 19 hours of continuous flight. But the humans inside cannot, not even close.
Biology has a hard, non-negotiable ceiling all its own. And here we hit the first great myth of modern aviation, the myth of the autopilot. Ask most passengers who is really flying the plane at cruise, and they will tell you it's the computer. The pilots, they assume, are essentially passengers themselves, sipping coffee, reading a book, watching the clouds drift. This picture is not entirely wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. Autopilot handles heading, altitude, and cruise speed, What autopilot does not handle is judgment. It cannot handle weather deviation around thunderstorms over the Bay of Bengal. It does not handle an engine anomaly at cruise altitude, a medical diversion, or sudden cabin depressurization, nor a fuel imbalance or a hostile weather front closing over the destination airport at the worst moment. Every one of those events demands a fully awake, fully rested human capable of hand-flying within seconds. And there is a darker fact the industry rarely publicizes to passengers: microsleeps. Brief, involuntary lapses of consciousness. They last 1 to 30 seconds, and the sleeping person often does not remember them happening at all. In the late 1990s, a studied long-haul crossing in 1999 forced the FAA to review fatigue data. What they found was uncomfortable. Even in two pilot cockpits on ultra-long routes, both pilots had experienced simultaneous microsleeps. Not falling asleep in the classic sense, but blinking out for a few seconds together over the empty ocean. That was the moment the regulators stopped asking whether crews could rest in their cockpit seats at all, and started asking where else on a pressurized tube 6 meters wide you could hide an entire bedroom. So where do you hide a bedroom on an aircraft already packed with passengers, cargo, fuel and avionics? The naive answer: give them a first-class seat. Block off business suites, draw the curtain, let crew nap. For years on some airlines and routes, that is exactly what happened: a Class 2 rest facility, a curtained-off passenger seat. Regulators accept it, but only grudgingly and only up to a certain flight duration. Because a seat, even a fully flat one, sits inside the cabin. It shares the cabin's noise.
85 decibels of continuous airflow, engine tone and constant passenger movement. And it shares the cabin's light too. It shares every interruption: the meal service, the crying child, the seatbelt announcement echoing through the cabin. Sleep in that environment is fragmented, shallow, and, measured by an electroencephalogram, barely restorative for aircrew. But here's the thing: beyond a certain threshold, the regulator demands something else. Something certified, something engineered. Something called a Class 1 crew rest compartment. And that, precisely, is where our story truly begins. The idea did not appear overnight. It grew slowly from the geometry of one specific aircraft, the 747. When Boeing designed the original Jumbo in the late 60s, they gave it a second deck, a distinctive hump, originally intended as a first-class lounge. Pilots on the earliest long-haul 747 operations sometimes slept there between shifts. The bunks were makeshift.
The privacy was minimal, but the principle was born, quietly, in that upper deck. That on a very long flight, the crew needed a space outside the passenger cabin to genuinely sleep. By the 1980s, on the Boeing 747-400, that principle became architecture, a dedicated overhead crew rest module. Boeing engineers tucked it into the crown of the fuselage, accessed by a small staircase near the rear galley. It had two proper bunks, ventilation, reading lights, a door that locked, sealed off from the cabin entirely. For the first time, pilots on a 14-hour Pacific crossing could climb up, close the door, and disappear. When the Boeing 777 arrived in the mid-1990s and later the Airbus A350, the concept matured further. Both aircraft offered optional overhead crew rest compartments, mounted in the crown of the fuselage above the passenger ceiling.
Forward of the wing box for the pilots, aft of the galleys for the cabin crew. Two separate populations, two separate rooms, two separate staircases, sleeping at the same time above the heads of the paying passengers. In parallel, the international regulator, ICAO, through Annex 6 of the Chicago Convention, was rewriting the rulebook.
Fatigue risk management systems. Flight time limitations. maximum flight duty periods, calculated with and without in-flight rest. The rules stopped asking whether the aircraft could fly a route and started asking whether the humans could. That shifts the entire logic of the compartment. The naive answer, pilot comfort, misses the real driver. The real reason is not comfort. It is legal augmentation, the price of flying humans through impossible hours. An airline cannot simply announce a 17-hour flight and staff it with 2 pilots. Regulators would refuse it. Under every major fatigue regulation on Earth, extending the flight duty period beyond a certain limit requires additional pilots. Not 2, 3, sometimes 4. A relief captain, a relief first officer, added to the crew list before departure. The exact number depends on flight length, time of day, direction of travel, and crucially, the quality of rest facility.
And that word, quality, is where the compartment earns its existence. Regulators categorize rest facilities in strict classes. Class 3 is a reclined passenger seat, separated from the cabin only by a curtain, the weakest option. Class 2 is a lie-flat seat in a screened-off area, better isolated but still adjacent to the main cabin. Class 1 is a bunk in a dedicated compartment, near darkness, temperature control, low noise, no passengers. Only a Class 1 facility allows the regulator to grant the maximum legal extension of flight duty hours. In practical terms, only a Class 1 bunk lets an airline legally fly Singapore to New York with affordable crew. The compartment is not there to be nice. It exists because without it, the flight itself is simply illegal. And there is a further layer, invisible to passengers, that governs precisely when pilots are permitted to sleep. It is called the circadian law, a biological window every human body passes through each 24-hour cycle. Roughly between 2 and 6 in the morning of your home time zone, a hormonal window opens toward fatigue. Reaction times low, judgment narrows, microsleeps become far more likely. The brain is at its most vulnerable state. Pilots and dispatchers plan the rotation so the crew flying approach and landing sleeps through their personal circadian law. Up in the compartment, in real darkness, in a real bed, hours before the wheels touch the destination runway. It is a piece of scheduling that never appears on the boarding pass and that quietly protects every landing. But the compartment itself is engineered in a way that would surprise even the most seasoned frequent flyers. Let's climb the ladder. On a Boeing 777, the crew rest sits in the crown space above ceiling panels. It's positioned forward of door 2, just behind the cockpit, a hidden module most passengers never suspect exists.
On the Airbus A350 it is similar, a low-ceilinged module roughly the size of a small caravan up top, 2 bunks, sometimes 3, a small vestibule, a door with a coded lock, the ceiling too close to stand. Bunks lay lengthwise along the aircraft axis, so turbulence rocks you head to foot rather than uncomfortably rocking side to side. Every element in that room is safety certified to a standard higher than the passenger cabin far below it. The compartment has its own oxygen supply, independent of passenger masks, so decompression cannot leave a sleeping pilot suffocating. It has its own smoke detection wired directly to the cockpit because fire above the ceiling would remain invisible. Undetected, that fire would become catastrophic before anyone in the cabin below could see the first sign of smoke. Soundproofing drops the 85 decibels of the cabin below to a level where slow-wave sleep is genuinely possible. Emergency egress procedures must be demonstrable in the certification test. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no theoretical performance allowed. A pilot must unstrap, exit the bunk, descend the ladder, and reach a functioning cockpit seat within seconds, even under sudden decompression. Even in complete darkness. Every second of that escape is measured, timed, and certified. All of that costs weight. 400 kilograms of structure, insulation, oxygen lines and wiring in the upper fuselage. Every kilo mounted this high directly affects the aircraft's delicate center of gravity and long-haul fuel burn. And all of that costs revenue. The floor space directly below the compartment is often unusable for overhead bins. Seats that could have filled that crown module had the airline chosen Class 2 instead are simply not there. On some 777 configurations, industry analysts estimate the crew rest compartment displaces 6 to 8 premium economy seats. On a daily route, that is millions of dollars of foregone annual revenue. And yet, airlines still pay. But here's the thing. Here is the math that explains why. Consider Singapore Airlines flight SQ23, Newark to Singapore.
18.5 hours in the air, occasionally past 19, one of the longest scheduled routes ever flown. The aircraft is an Airbus A350-900 in ultra-long-range configuration. On board, 4 pilots, 2 captains and 2 first officers. Forward of the cabin, 2 Class 1 bunks await the pilots, a separate compartment further aft for cabin crew. The rotation is choreographed. Through takeoff, climb and first-hour cruise, all 4 pilots stay near the cockpit. Then it begins. The first pair takes 3 to 4 hours in the bunk, while the second pair flies. Then they swap. Then again. Roughly 90 minutes before landing, as the aircraft begins its descent, the plane aligns. Approach pilots have just had a long, uninterrupted rest, precisely timed to end before their peak workload begins. They wake, wash, dress, review arrival plates, and step into the cockpit at the sharpest point of duty. None of this is improvised.
Every minute is anchored in decades of NASA fatigue research from the 80s. Sleep studies at NASA's Ames Research Center used electroencephalography, actigraphy, and cognitive testing on active line pilots. Those studies established the numerical foundations that fatigue regulators around the world still cite in today's flight time rules. Minimum rest lengths, circadian phase windows, split sleep architectures. All of it quietly underpins every long-haul timetable you fly, and the industry is still pushing further. Qantas has spent years developing what it calls Project Sunrise, non-stop flights from Australia's east coast to London and New York, sustained continuously for 20 hours or more. To make that survivable, Qantas ordered a specialized Airbus A350-1000 with an expanded rest area and extra bunk module. Cabin lighting is programmed to simulate optimal circadian entrainment as the aircraft crosses multiple time zones in sequence. The airline has publicly stated the economic viability of the entire route depends on this crew rest architecture. Remove the compartment and the flight cannot be flown. The bunks are not luxury, they are permission. Calculate cost per bunk hour. Amortized structural cost divided by hours actually occupied by sleeping crew across service life. The number is uncomfortably high. But the alternative, the cost of not having it, is effectively infinite. Because without those hidden bunks tucked above the ceiling, the 20-hour ultra-long-haul route simply does not exist. A question still hangs over the industry. Even with the compartment, 4 pilots and full fatigue management architecture in place, is the human body actually up to this? The honest answer from every fatigue scientist is barely. The compartment does not make a pilot fresh. It does not turn a 19-hour workday into an 8-hour one. It does exactly one thing.
It provides a certified opportunity for restorative sleep in a physiologically approved environment. This happens at a moment when the regulator will trade that rest for additional legal duty hours. That is the entire deal. The regulator trades hours for bunks. Airlines pay in fuel and weight. The passenger pays indirectly in the ticket price. In exchange, the flight departs, crosses an ocean, and lands. It lands with a crew whose reaction time on final approach remains within the safety margin regulators accept. That margin, in some studies, is measured not in hours, but in minutes. Minutes of alertness reserve, banked overhead. Spent on the last 200 seconds, when the aircraft hits the runway centerline and tires touch concrete. The compartment above the ceiling is not a comfort feature. It is a safety component, critical as landing gear. Or the fire suppression system itself. It just happens to look exactly like a quiet, ordinary bedroom. And the next generation of long-haul aircraft is quietly rewriting the entire geometry of that hidden bedroom. The Airbus A350-1000ULR, configured for Project Sunrise, features a redesigned crown with a more spacious pilot compartment forward. A second, larger cabin crew rest area sits aft, engineered for the demands of ultra-long-range operations.
Boeing's forthcoming 777X will offer an expanded overhead rest module with revised acoustic isolation and additional bunk positions. It is built to support routes exceeding 18 hours, carrying fuller cabin crew complements across the longest sectors. Beyond that, the frontier gets stranger. Research in Europe and North America now studies reduced crew operations. The idea: during long, stable cruise, a single pilot monitors the aircraft while the other rests below. Supported by enhanced onboard automation and ground-based dispatch, a controversial concept that pilot unions oppose vehemently. Regulators remain cautious. But here's the thing: the underlying research advances and certification would rewrite everything. Rest becomes not an augmentation between two active pilots, but a rotation between a monitor and a sleeper. Onboard biometric systems are moving in parallel. Wearable sensors and cockpit cameras are tested to detect fatigue. Eyelid closure duration, head posture drift, heart rate variability, the earliest signatures the body quietly reveals. In a future cockpit, the aircraft itself may know the flying pilot is fading 10 minutes before he does. It may prompt a rotation into the compartment, and the bunk stops being merely a scheduled asset. Instead, it becomes an on-demand medical intervention, the aircraft actively safeguarding those who fly it. And the compartment is no longer just for pilots alone. Cabin crew rest modules are evolving in parallel. Separate compartments in the tail crown or under the cabin floor with better acoustics and precise temperature control. Some new-build widebodies now offer individual privacy curtains and personal reading lights above every dedicated crew bunk today. The people serving meals and safeguarding 300 passengers across 17 hours now receive sleep architecture nearly matching pilots. The sky is quietly being redesigned, not in the visible wings, the engines or the livery on the tail, but in the crown spaces, ceiling voids, certified rooms above your head that you will never see or notice. And yet their existence is precisely what makes your 17-hour transoceanic ticket physiologically and legally possible at all. The next time you board a long-haul flight, look carefully at the ceiling panel behind the cockpit door. Somewhere nearby, there is a small handle, a hatch, a folding ladder rising into the fuselage geometry above. Above it sits a compartment engineered to a standard higher than the cabin you are actually sitting in, designed to protect not the passengers directly, but the humans without whom the passengers cannot be safely flown. That room, more than autopilot, more than engines, more than any flight plan, is what makes long-haul survivable.
If these engineering solutions surprised you, this channel has more films about how humanity outsmarts its own biology. Next, how autonomous cruise, hydrogen propulsion, and the redesigned cockpit of the 2040s will reshape every future flight. Subscribe to continue the exploration. There are many